She applied for a job in her father's company and was treated badly, until she revealed her true identity. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Sterling Enterprises, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. It was a place where ambition thrived, where dreams were either forged into reality or crushed under the weight of corporate competition. For years, this towering skyscraper had been synonymous with success, its name whispered with reverence in boardrooms around the world. But today, it felt like an impenetrable fortress to her, a young woman standing nervously at the entrance, clutching a folder filled with papers that summarized her life's achievements thus far. Her name was Evelyn, though she had submitted her application under the pseudonym Eva Miller. The decision to use a different name wasn't made lightly. It was born out of a desire to prove herself on her own terms, without the shadow of her family legacy looming over her every move. Evelyn Sterling came from privilege, yes, but she wanted more than just the gilded path laid out before her. She craved authenticity, validation earned not because of who her father was but because of what she could do. And so, armed with determination and a carefully crafted resume, she walked into the building her father had built from the ground up, ready to carve her own destiny. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. From the moment Evelyn stepped into the HR department, she sensed something amiss. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer screen when Evelyn introduced herself. "You're here for the marketing associate position?" the woman asked curtly, her tone laced with disinterest. Without waiting for confirmation, she handed Evelyn a clipboard and instructed her to fill out some additional forms. As Evelyn sat down, she couldn't help but notice the way people moved past her, heads held high, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if she were invisible. Perhaps it was nerves making her overly sensitive, but there seemed to be an unspoken hierarchy in the air, one that relegated newcomers to the bottom rung until they proved their worth. Still, Evelyn reminded herself why she was here. This was her chance to show the world, and herself, that she wasn't just another entitled heir. The interview process began shortly after. Evelyn was ushered into a small, sterile room where two panelists awaited her, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a younger woman whose sharp gaze never wavered. They introduced themselves as Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Harper, respectively, and wasted no time diving into questions about her qualifications. At first, Evelyn felt confident. She spoke passionately about her previous internships, her coursework, and the campaigns she had conceptualized during her university years. But as the minutes ticked by, she noticed a shift in their demeanor. Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table. "So, Eva," he said, drawing out her fake surname as if testing its validity. "Your resume looks impressive enough, but I have to ask, why would someone with your background choose to apply for such an entry-level role?" Evelyn hesitated. She hadn't anticipated this line of questioning so early in the interview. "I believe in starting from the ground up," she replied evenly. "I want to understand every aspect of the business before moving forward." Ms. Harper raised an eyebrow. "That's admirable, certainly. But let's be honest. Most candidates applying for this position don't come with your pedigree." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. "I assure you, my qualifications speak for themselves," Evelyn said, forcing a smile despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. The rest of the interview followed a similar pattern. Probing questions disguised as casual conversation, subtle jabs at her supposed lack of experience, and thinly veiled skepticism about her intentions. By the time it ended, Evelyn left the room feeling drained and defeated. Whatever glimmer of hope she'd carried with her that morning had dimmed considerably. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn found herself caught in a limbo of uncertainty. Despite acing the written assessments and receiving positive feedback from some of the junior staff she interacted with during group exercises, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged unfairly. Rumors swirled among the employees, whispers of nepotism and favoritism, even though no one knew her true identity. To them, she was simply Eva Miller, the outsider trying to infiltrate their ranks. And then came the day she received the call. "Miss Miller," Mr. Caldwell's voice echoed through the phone, clipped and formal. "We regret to inform you that we've decided to move forward with another candidate for the marketing associate position." Evelyn's heart sank. She thanked him politely, masking her disappointment behind a facade of professionalism, but inside, she was reeling. Had she really been rejected because of who she was, or rather, who they thought she was? The injustice of it all gnawed at her, fueling a quiet fire within. Determined not to give up, Evelyn decided to take matters into her own hands. If they wouldn't hire her outright, she would find another way to prove herself. Using connections she'd cultivated during her internship days, she secured a temporary freelance contract with Sterling Enterprises' creative team. It wasn't the full-time role she'd envisioned, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to demonstrate her capabilities without relying on her last name. Her first assignment was daunting: revamp a struggling ad campaign for one of the company's lesser-known products. The task required long hours, late nights, and countless cups of coffee, but Evelyn poured everything she had into it. She studied market trends, analyzed consumer behavior, and brainstormed innovative ideas that pushed boundaries. Slowly but surely, her hard work began to pay off. The revamped campaign gained traction, earning praise from clients and colleagues alike. Yet, despite her growing contributions, Evelyn continued to face resistance. Some dismissed her ideas as naive or impractical, while others openly questioned her motives. Even those who acknowledged her talent did so grudgingly, as if begrudging her presence in their midst. It was exhausting, demoralizing even, but Evelyn refused to let it break her spirit. One evening, as she stayed late to finalize a presentation, she overheard fragments of a conversation between two senior executives passing by her cubicle. Their voices carried through the otherwise empty office, tinged with frustration. "She's good, I'll give her that," one of them muttered. "Too good, if you ask me. Almost makes you wonder." "Wonder what?" the other replied sharply. "That maybe she's not who she says she is." Evelyn froze, her pen hovering mid-air above the document in front of her. So, they suspected. Or at least, they were beginning to doubt the story she'd spun. Part of her wanted to march out there and confront them, to reveal the truth once and for all. But another part, the smarter, more strategic part, knew better. Timing was everything, and now wasn't the right moment. Instead, she resolved to bide her time, to gather allies and build a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever storm might come. Because deep down, Evelyn knew that revealing her true identity wouldn't just change how others saw her, it would change how she saw herself. And she wasn't ready for that yet. Little did she know, however, that the turning point was closer than she realized. A single event loomed on the horizon, one that would force her hand and alter the course of her journey forever. The turning point arrived unexpectedly, as these things often do. It began with an email, a seemingly innocuous message from the CEO's office inviting select employees to attend a high-profile brainstorming session for a new product launch. Evelyn scanned the list of attendees and felt her stomach drop. Her name wasn't on it. At first, she tried to brush it off. After all, she was still technically a freelancer, not a full-time employee. But as the days passed and whispers of the meeting filled the office hallways, she couldn't ignore the sting of exclusion. The project in question was one of the most anticipated initiatives Sterling Enterprises had undertaken in years, and being left out felt like yet another reminder that she didn't belong. Determined to make her mark anyway, Evelyn decided to take matters into her own hands. She spent her evenings researching the product, a cutting-edge smart device designed to revolutionize home automation, and drafting a comprehensive marketing strategy. Drawing on everything she'd learned during her time at the company, she crafted a bold, innovative campaign that combined sleek visuals with targeted messaging aimed at capturing both tech-savvy millennials and older consumers eager to embrace modern convenience. When the day of the brainstorming session arrived, Evelyn arrived early, slipping into the conference room before anyone else noticed. She set up her laptop and prepared to present her ideas, knowing full well that doing so without an invitation could backfire spectacularly. Still, she told herself, sometimes risks were necessary to break through barriers. As the room began to fill with executives and senior staff, murmurs of confusion rippled through the air. "Who invited Eva Miller?" someone whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Evelyn ignored them, focusing instead on the screen where her presentation was queued up and ready to go. Mr. Caldwell entered last, his expression darkening when he spotted her. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "I'm here to contribute," Evelyn replied calmly, standing to face him. "I may not have been formally invited, but I've put together some ideas for the campaign that I believe could be valuable." Before Mr. Caldwell could respond, the CEO himself walked in, none other than Jonathan Sterling, Evelyn's father. His presence silenced the room instantly. He glanced around, his gaze landing briefly on Evelyn before moving on. To everyone else, it must have seemed like a fleeting look, but Evelyn caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. For a brief moment, their connection hung suspended in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. "Let's get started," Jonathan said briskly, taking his seat at the head of the table. As the meeting progressed, various team members presented their strategies, each more conventional than the last. Evelyn listened intently, waiting for her opportunity. Finally, when there was a lull in the discussion, she spoke up. "If I may, I'd like to share an alternative approach." Without waiting for permission, she launched into her presentation, her voice steady and confident. The room fell silent as images of her proposed campaign flashed across the screen. Dynamic visuals paired with data-driven insights that painted a clear picture of how the product could dominate the market. By the time she finished, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Even Mr. Caldwell looked impressed, though he masked it quickly behind a scowl. Evelyn sat down, her heart pounding, and waited for the verdict. Jonathan leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "That was impressive," he said slowly. "Very thorough. Where did you say you worked before joining us?" Evelyn hesitated, sensing the trap. "I interned at several startups during college," she replied carefully. "Most recently, I consulted for a digital marketing agency." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, then turned to address the group. "Well, this certainly gives us something to consider. Let's adjourn for now and reconvene tomorrow to finalize our plans." As the others filed out of the room, Evelyn lingered, gathering her belongings. Just as she was about to leave, Jonathan called her name, or rather, her alias. "Miss Miller, a word?" Her breath hitched. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She turned to face him, her pulse racing. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He studied her for a long moment, his piercing blue eyes searching hers. Then, in a voice low enough that only she could hear, he said, "You're better than I expected, Evie." The use of her childhood nickname sent a jolt through her. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. "I don't know what you mean," she managed to say, though her voice wavered slightly. Jonathan smiled faintly, a hint of pride softening his usually stern features. "Don't play coy with me. You think I wouldn't recognize my own daughter's brilliance? Or that determination of yours?" Evelyn's defenses crumbled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, betraying the emotions she'd kept locked away for so long. "I wanted to prove myself," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want anyone to think I got here because of you." Jonathan sighed, his expression softening further. "And you have more than you realize. But hiding who you are, it's not sustainable, Evie. People will find out eventually. And when they do, you'll need to decide how you want to handle it." Evelyn nodded, absorbing his words. She knew he was right, but the thought of revealing her true identity still terrified her. What would her colleagues think? Would they respect her accomplishments, or dismiss them as mere nepotism? "You've earned this," Jonathan added gently. "Don't let fear hold you back." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. She stared at the empty chair where he'd been sitting, replaying his words over and over in her mind. For the first time since starting this journey, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to step fully into her truth. Not as Eva Miller, the anonymous freelancer, but as Evelyn Sterling, the woman determined to forge her own path. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As she packed up her things and headed back to her desk, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. Revealing her identity would change everything, not just for her, but for those around her. And while she knew it was inevitable, she also knew she needed to choose the right moment. For now, she resolved to keep pushing forward, to continue proving herself in ways that left no room for doubt. Because when the time came to reveal her true self, she wanted to do so not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who had already earned it. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself in a strange limbo. The weight of her father's words lingered heavily on her mind, but she also felt a newfound clarity. She had always known that hiding behind Eva Miller was only a temporary solution, a bridge to cross until she could stand confidently as herself. Now, with Jonathan's quiet acknowledgement and subtle encouragement, The inevitability of revealing her true identity pressed closer than ever. Yet, Evelyn wasn't ready to make that leap just yet. There were still battles to fight, victories to claim, and moments where she needed to prove not only to others but to herself that her worth wasn't tied to her last name. So, she threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, determined to leave an indelible mark before unveiling the truth. Her bold campaign proposal for the Smart Device project gained traction faster than anyone anticipated. Senior executives who had initially dismissed her ideas began revisiting them, impressed by their depth and innovation. Even Mr. Caldwell, who had been one of her harshest critics, grudgingly admitted during a follow-up meeting that her approach might be the key to capturing a broader audience. "You've certainly earned your place at this table, Miss Miller," he said stiffly, though there was a flicker of begrudging respect in his eyes. Evelyn accepted the compliment with grace, masking the turmoil brewing beneath her calm exterior. Every success brought her closer to the precipice of revelation, and every compliment felt like both validation and a ticking clock counting down to the moment when everything would change. Meanwhile, whispers about Eva Miller continued to circulate throughout the office. Some admired her tenacity, others remained suspicious of her seemingly effortless rise within the company. Among these skeptics was Ms. Harper, the sharp-eyed interviewer from Evelyn's initial job application. Harper had taken an almost personal interest in dissecting Evelyn's background, convinced that something didn't add up. One afternoon, Evelyn overheard Harper speaking animatedly to a colleague near the coffee machine. "There's no record of her working at those agencies she mentioned," Harper said, her voice low but urgent. "And have you noticed how familiar she seems with internal processes? It's almost like she knows more than she lets on." Evelyn froze mid-step, her heart pounding. She had been careful, meticulous, even, in crafting her backstory. But Harper's instincts were sharp, and it seemed only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. Evelyn realized then that she couldn't afford to wait much longer. If her secret came out through rumors or accusations, it would undermine everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. That evening, as she sat alone in her apartment reviewing notes for an upcoming presentation, Evelyn allowed herself to confront the fear that had haunted her since day one. What if revealing her identity alienated her colleagues? What if they saw her accomplishments not as evidence of her skill but as proof of privilege? And what if, perhaps worst of all, her father's reputation overshadowed her own? But as she stared at her reflection in the darkened window, another thought surfaced. What if staying silent cost her more than speaking up? Her journey thus far had been defined by resilience, creativity, and an unyielding drive to succeed. Those qualities weren't diminished by her lineage, they were enhanced by it. Perhaps the real challenge wasn't proving she could succeed without her family name, but showing that she could embrace it while remaining authentically herself. With that realization, Evelyn made a decision. She wouldn't reveal her identity impulsively or defensively. Instead, she would choose the perfect moment, a culmination of her efforts, a testament to her capabilities, and let the truth amplify her achievements rather than diminish them. The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. A major industry conference was scheduled for the following week, and Sterling Enterprises had secured a coveted keynote slot to showcase its new product line. When the announcement went out that Eva Miller had been selected to represent the creative team during the presentation, murmurs of surprise rippled through the office. "Why her?" one employee muttered under their breath. "She hasn't even been here that long. She must have some serious connections," another replied dryly. Evelyn ignored the comments, focusing instead on preparing for the event. This was her chance, not just to highlight her work but to redefine how people saw her. She poured hours into refining the presentation, ensuring every detail was flawless. She practiced her delivery until her voice carried authority and conviction, rehearsing late into the night until exhaustion claimed her. On the morning of the conference, Evelyn dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded confidence without being overly ostentatious. As she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights casting a warm glow over the audience, she took a deep breath and began. For 20 minutes, she captivated the room, weaving together data, storytelling, and visuals to paint a vivid picture of Sterling Enterprises' vision for the future. The audience listened intently, their attention unwavering as she outlined the innovative strategies behind the product launch. By the time she reached the final slide, applause erupted, filling the auditorium with waves of approval. As Evelyn stood there, basking in the glow of her success, she felt a surge of pride, not just for what she had accomplished but for the foundation she had built to support the truth she was about to share. With the crowd still cheering, she paused, letting the noise settle before speaking again. "There's something I need to say," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "When I joined Sterling Enterprises, I did so under a different name, Eva Miller. It was a choice I made because I wanted to prove to myself, and to all of you, that my contributions could stand on their own merit." A murmur rippled through the audience, growing louder as people exchanged puzzled glances. Evelyn pressed on, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "But today, I want to step fully into who I am. My name is Evelyn Sterling, and yes, I am the daughter of Jonathan Sterling. But everything I've achieved here, from the campaigns I've developed to the ideas I've shared, is mine. And I hope that my work has shown you that I belong here, not because of my last name but because of what I bring to the table." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. For a moment, Evelyn feared she had miscalculated, that the revelation would overshadow everything she had worked for. But then, slowly, the silence broke. A single pair of hands began clapping, followed by another and another, until the entire auditorium erupted in applause once more. Among the cheers, Evelyn spotted her father sitting in the front row, his expression unreadable but his eyes shining with unmistakable pride. In that moment, she knew she had done the right thing, not just for herself but for everyone watching. She had faced her fears, embraced her truth, and emerged stronger for it. But as the applause faded and Evelyn stepped off the stage, she realized that this was only the beginning. Revealing her identity had opened doors she hadn't anticipated, but it had also set new challenges in motion. How would her colleagues react now that they knew the truth? Could she maintain the trust and respect she had earned? And most importantly, how would she continue to grow? Not as Eva Miller or Evelyn Sterling, but simply as Evelyn. The answers lay ahead, waiting to be discovered.